Hello friends, today we are going to discuss about the Indus Water Treaty because it has completed 60 years since its inception. So as you know that Indus Water Treaty was signed in the year 1960. So today as it completes its 60th year of continuance, we're going to discuss about the performance of this treaty and the challenges of the treaty and most importantly the future of this treaty in terms of deteriorating India and Pakistan relations. So, first of all, let us see what this treaty is. This treaty was signed between India and Pakistan under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru and Ayub Khan, respectively, in the year 1960. So, Indus Basin originates from Tibet, that is an autonomous uh, province of China. So the 6 rivers of Indus Basin were divided between India and Pakistan. The 3 western rivers, Jhelum, Chenab, and Indus, were allocated to Pakistan, while the western rivers, Ravi, Beas, and Satluj, were allocated to India. But there was a certain condition that India could use the western rivers. The western rivers are those which are allocated to Pakistan. India could use them only for the purposes of consumption. So this area is the most disputed subject of this treaty, where most of the disputes arise from this clause that India can use the western rivers for consumption purposes. Now, what are these consumption purposes? Consumption purposes are, for example, India can use these western rivers for agriculture, drinking water, and even some localized storage purposes also. So, it cannot build big dams like for storage of waters of these of the waters of these rivers, but it can use localized storage that would that is not hampering the flow of that should not hamper the flow of these western rivers. So India was allowed to use these western rivers for consumption purposes. So as you can see that no storage and irrigation systems can be built by India on the western rivers. This entire treaty was brokered by World Bank, and initially Pakistan was reluctant to sign this treaty even though this treaty was particularly favorable to Pakistan, but it was skeptical of India's stance on this treaty in the future, and it thought that India could weaponize the rivers in the future. Still, uh, India was on the table and Pakistan was on the table. To facilitate Pakistan from signing this treaty, uh, World Bank gave some SOPs in terms of rewards and aid to Pakistan, and ultimately Pakistan signed this treaty. So to for the implementation of this treaty, a permanent Indus Commission was established, according to which some experts from India and some experts from Pakistan meet regularly and discuss the implementation of the treaty on a regular basis. So, as we can see, this how this treaty originated, but now let us move forward to see how it has performed over the last 60 years. As we know that it had this treaty is in continuance since the last 60 years, so it has all automatically withstood several wars and tensions that occur regularly between India and Pakistan. So, and this permanent Indus Water Commission, which was set up under the treaty to uh, implement the treaty provisions, it meets regularly to discuss the technical issues with respect to the implementation of treaty. It has been meeting, but for this year, for 2019-20, the meeting has been deferred by mutual agreement. because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, as we can see that the performance of the treaty has been satisfactory. The issues between India and Pakistan have not culminated in the performance of this treaty. Both have cooperated despite having uh, irritants in relationship. This treaty has performed quite well. So, what are the challenges? There would be some challenges, as you know that there have been several wars, and the relationship between India and Pakistan has not been smooth enough during the last 60 years. So, let us see what were the challenges, what are the current challenges, and how Indus Water Treaty has been withstanding such challenges since the past 60 years. So, first challenge is the arbitrary distribution. This first challenge stems from the inception of the treaty itself. Uh, they are saying that the partition of rivers was made without any heed to hydrology, basin requirements, and local needs. So this partition was arbitrary, and it was definitely in favor of Pakistan, and almost 80% of the waters of Indus River Basin were allocated to Pakistan, and India could utilize only 20% of the Indus River Basin waters, despite the major basin of the Indus water lying in the Indian territory. Okay, so the first challenge itself stems from the inception of the treaty, that the distribution has not been fair to India. Uh, we are discussing here that we already discussed that eastern rivers were allocated to Pakistan and western rivers were all allocated to, I'm sorry, eastern rivers were allocated to India and western rivers were allocated to Pakistan. And India was allowed to use western rivers for agriculture and drinking purposes, that is purposes of consumption, and it was also allowed to build limited storage facilities. But the distribution has not been fair, as I discussed, because the amount of water that India could use was severely limited as compared to Pakistan. Now, the second dispute relates to settlement of the second challenge relates to the settlement of disputes. So, the first assumption or the first condition that was made in this treaty was that there was no exit clause, that none of the parties, that is Pakistan and India, could exit the treaty. Uh, in any contract, there is always a provision for discontinuance of the contract, but this treaty is a type of a contract. This treaty is uh, this treaty had no such exit clause where conditions could have been specified that in case of such conflict, one party or the other deserves the right to exit this treaty. There was no exit clause in this treaty. All the differences, uh, the term referred here was differences and not dispute. All the differences were to be settled by a neutral expert. uh, who is a neutral expert? An expert who has no visible interest with India uh, gaining anything from this treaty, or from Pakistan gaining anything from this treaty. So that person would be a neutral person. So all dispute mechanisms uh, f- were allowed to be addressed through a neutral expert level, and disputes were to be addressed by the court of arbitration. So, in case there has been differences in an interpretation of any provision of the treaty, a neutral expert level was sufficient. But in case those differences uh, further into a dispute, then the matter must have to be referred to the court of arbitration. So in 2005, Pakistan invoked the dispute resolution mechanism when India constructed Baglihar run of the river dam on the river Chenab. So a neutral expert was appointed. This because the it was a difference of interpretation. So a neutral expert was appointed in 2007. After that is after 2 years of invoking this dispute resolution mechanism, the neutral expert gave his judgment in favor of India, and it means that it said India was right in its India had the right to build this Baglihar run of the river dam project. As you can see that this Chenab river is a western river which is actually allocated to Pakistan. But as I have said earlier, as we can see that western rivers are allowed India is allowed to explore western rivers for consumption purposes. So the difference was that Baglihar project uh, was not meant to uh, was just not meant to explore the river water for consumptive purposes, but it was a big storage facility, that is a dam, which India is not allowed to build on the western rivers. But the neutral expert said that no, uh, it is just not disrupting the flow of the river, and there it is not a big storage facility, it is just a localized storage which is important for agriculture and drinking water purposes. So India is well within its right to explore this project. So it gave the verdict in India's favor. And now recently Pakistan is insisting, because Pakistan has seen that the neutral experts verdict was in favor of India earlier in the year 2007. So now Pakistan is trying to insist that the projects of Kishanganga and Ratle are moved to the court of arbitration. That is the second level, that deals with the disputes. That these projects, the disputes or the differences or the disputes of upon these projects should move or should escalate to the level of court of arbitration, because as we have seen that it is not very comfortable with the neutral experts view. But India is strongly objecting, and it is saying that World Bank should instead set up a neutral expert like in the year 2005, and the treaty under the treaty before these differences go to the court of arbitration. So India is saying, let us first settle our differences on with the mechanism of a neutral expert, and if you're not satisfied with this neutral expert, only then we should move ahead to the second level, that is the level of court of arbitration. But Pakistan is insisting that we should directly escalate this matter to the court of arbitration, for which against which India is not in favor. Okay, so as World Bank is coming under pressure from the two sides, World Bank is seeking both processes simultaneously. So World Bank is saying that let us do these two things simultaneously. Let us also set up a neutral expert, and let us also refer this matter to the court of arbitration. India is objecting to it because it is not in favor of directly going to the court of arbitration. It is saying that the in that all the mechanisms of dispute resolution should flow as per the provisions of the treaty, and there cannot be a skipping of any process or a level that Pakistan is demanding at the moment. So World Bank, as there is a stalemate in positions of both India and Pakistan, so World Bank is also offering that you can also explore options outside the treaty, and World Bank is ready to mediate between India and Pakistan in case both of them, both India and Pakistan, are comfortable to move out of the provisions of the treaty to settle these disputes. But India is not. India has not yet communicated its stance. India may not be in favor of going any out of this treaty, because this treaty has we discussed this treaty for a long time, and we have respected the provisions of the treaty for a very long time. India cannot afford to make this treaty provisions redundant. Okay, we have been scrupulously following these provisions, and we have already complied with all the provisions, despite Pakistan being a habitual offender. So, as we can see, this dispute resolution mechanism has failed. It has been paralyzed. It has run into a stalemate. So, this dispute resolution mechanism has also been a challenge between India and Pakistan for this treaty. Now, the third challenge is geostrategic use of this treaty. So, Pakistan considers that this treaty gives it leverage to use the provisions against India for geostrategic purposes. So, Pakistan tries to make dispute out of nothing when India is making any when India is trying to utilize any uh, of the western river, any water from any project, when India is trying to build any small project for consumption purposes on the western rivers. So any initiative by India, even within its right, is objected by Pakistan, and so that it delays the project, and India gets entangled in the web of disputes with Pakistan. So, Pakistan is using this for its geostrategic purpose, for thwarting any economic progress in Jammu and Kashmir. It is not willing to, Pakistan is not willing to facilitate any development in the Jammu and Kashmir, the UT of Jammu and Kashmir, and that's why it uses the provisions of Indus Water Treaty to thwart any projects, any development projects in the Union Territory, which India is well within its right to pursue. So there has been some strong sentiments in Pakistan, where the government of Pakistan and Pakistan Army is manipulating the media and its people, uh, that by saying that the treaty provisions have been unfair to them. Um, a former Pakistani general was also seen threatening India with a nuclear option if India keeps on pursuing its projects in Jammu and Kashmir. So this all this is happening despite India having an unfavorable distribution under the treaty. So how India has responded? India has in India there has been acute dissatisfaction with the treaty. As I've told you that 20% of waters were allocated to India, only 20%, and almost 80% of the waters were allocated to Pakistan. So since its inception, we are aware that it has been an unequal treaty. But despite that, just because we have signed this treaty, we are keeping our words, and we have maintained the provisions and conditions of the treaty since the beginning. And there are instances where our public opinion goes against the treaty, and there is there is an immense amount of pressure upon the government that we should exit this treaty, which India is well within its right, because Vienna Convention on Treaties allows a party to exit from a treaty, because if the other party is not being an irresponsible state. So Pakistan is harboring terrorists. It is so, and it is not allowing India to explore western rivers, which India is allowed to explore under the treaty. And now let us let me give you an example that India is constructing storage facilities up to 3.4 MAF on western rivers. So India is constructing 3.4 units of it. 3.4 India is just utilizing 3.4 MAF of western rivers, and it is taking steps to flow the eastern rivers waters to Pakistan by utilizing on India's side. Why India is doing it? Just because India wants to explore the full potential of this treaty, but only 2 MAF water per year uh, goes to almost 2 MAF of water goes to, of in eastern water rivers goes to Pakistan unutilized. And the Pakistani official data says that it is not just 2 MAF, but it is almost 5 MAF water that goes unhindered to Pakistan. So you know that eastern rivers, we are well within our rights to explore 100% of eastern water rivers, but we are allowing almost 5 MAF of waters to flow to Pakistan. So in case India just utilizes 100% of its water, Pakistan would go dry, because almost we are letting these eastern rivers which are allocated to us, we are letting these rivers to go uninterrupted to Pakistan. If we stop them, we which is well within our right to do so, if we just stop them, then Pakistan, a major region of Pakistan, especially till Karachi, would go dry. So what is the future of this treaty? This treaty was signed 60 years ago. The dynamics have changed today. The concerns of climate change, the technological shift in usage of water, water management, pollution, basin development criteria, all these were not mentioned in the treaty because, and now the time has changed. So, and the new with new technological upgradations, the flow of the rivers may have changed due to climate change. So, there is a need for renegotiation of this treaty uh, uh, because it is definitely highly inequitable for India. This treaty is highly inequitable for India. As I told you that only 20% of the waters of Indus Basin were allocated to India, and Pakistan has rights of over 80% of the waters. So now we are saying that this treaty is not in favor of India. So why would Pakistan renegotiate it? Pakistan would try to maintain the status quo. It would thwart any attempt to renegotiate the treaty either by India or by World Bank or rather by any other power. So World Bank is itself after 60 years, we find that World Bank is itself logged in the dispute resolution mechanism that it set up in the treaty provisions. So neither India is happy with the treaty, nor Pakistan was happy initially during the treaty. Now today, World Bank is also not yet fully comfortable with the dispute resolution mechanism of the treaty, as we can see that in the examples of Kishan Ganga and Ratli projects, that that World Bank is finding itself paralyzed in resolving the disputes between India and Pakistan for these projects. So it has been 60 years. The times have changed. The treaty, the parties to the treaty, that is India and Pakistan, the dynamics between their relationship has changed. Uh, there have been new concerns such as climate change and technological changes. So it is time to either renegotiate the treaty or give more benefits to India because it has been an unfair treaty along the way. So this is how the treaty has performed till now. Uh, the future In the future, as we can see, that it is not up for renegotiation. So in this article, the author is the former deputy NSA of India, Mr. Ravind Gupta. He's saying that the treaty is precariously poised. Now, what is the term precariously poised? It means that this treaty is sitting on the edge of a gorge, and it may fall anytime. Uh, it is just sitting on the edge, and it may fall anytime. So this treaty, this Indus Water Treaty, has not been able to serve the purposes of either India or uh, World Bank. It has only favored Pakistan. So it has been an unfair treaty. So this was our topic for today. This Indus Water Treaty. We'll meet next time with another topic. Until then, goodbye. Thank you.